From the national headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, good evening, everybody. I'm John Huddy, filling in for Rick Sanchez. We begin tonight with the situation that continues to develop in Syria. It's a complex story with shifting alliances and bloody grudges playing out in one of the most ancient regions in the world that has already seen so much violence. Turkey continues its military offensive against Kurdish fighters, once backed by the United States, in northeastern Syria. Turkish President Recep Erdogan says that the offensive is to remove those Kurdish-led forces and create a quote-unquote safe zone for millions of Syrian refugees to return to. But the fight threatens to spiral into an all-out war. The United Nations says an estimated 150 to 160,000 people have already been displaced, and that number continues to grow. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's army has rolled into several key cities near the Turkish border. Three in particular, Tal Tamer, Manbij, and Kobani, are once again on the front lines. These are three cities that I talked a lot about when I was a Middle East correspondent based in Israel. Specifically, the Kurds' fight against ISIS there, a vicious and grueling battle for the Kurds who had the help of the United States and our coalition partners. Well, that was then. This is now. The U.S. is out. Syria's army is in. It's a dramatic shift in alliances between two longtime enemies and adversaries, proving the old adage remains true in this part of the world, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where it's time to start doing news again. All right, and here's the list of questions that we think you'll be asking tomorrow. First, will Turkey and the Syrian government come to terms in the Kurdish northeast part of the country? What will come of President Putin's visit to the heads of state of Gulf countries? And is phase one of the U.S.-China trade deal really in the works? That said, going back to Syria, a new deal between the Syrian government and Kurdish forces could lead to a face-off between Syria and Turkey as both countries increase their troop presence at the border. This as the U.S. announces plans to impose new measures against its NATO ally over Turkey's ongoing offensive against the Kurds. Talking about this, RT's Rachel Blevins is joining us now with the latest. Rachel?
Well, John, it looks like the United States is now making moves to stop Turkey's operation in Syria. Now, President Trump has signed an executive order to press Turkey to halt its actions in Syria and to push for an immediate ceasefire. This comes 1 week after the U.S. began pulling troops from Syria's northern border. Syria is now sending its own troops in to stand with Kurdish forces after a deal was made between the Kurds and the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Syrian troops were seen advancing north and returning to the country's northeastern region for the first time in years. While the territory has been controlled by the Kurds, it has come under assault by Turkish forces who label the Kurdish militants as a terrorist group. Now, Turkey claims the goal of the ongoing offensive is to create a safe zone so that millions of Syrian refugees can return to their country. But the bombing campaign launched by Turkey has sent tens of thousands of civilians fleeing from their homes, and it has the power to impact more than 300,000 civilians if it continues. It has also taken the Kurds away from guarding thousands of ISIS prisoners and their families, and reports claim that around 1,000 of those prisoners have already escaped. In addition to launching airstrikes, Turkey has cut off the main roadways used by the Kurds. This includes the only access to the Kurdish-controlled city of Kobani, where U.S. troops are based. Now, the battle between Turkey and the Kurds has been ongoing for decades, but it has escalated in recent years as the Kurds have gained more power in northeastern Syria, fueled by both arms and funding from the United States. When Turkish President Erdogan threatened to launch an offensive in late 2018, he admitted that the Trump administration convinced him to hold back. But he said he warned the U.S. that in the upcoming months on the ground in Syria, Turkey would follow through with a style of incursion that eliminates both the elements of Kurdish militias and the remnants of ISIS. While the U.S. has pulled back troops, it has also condemned Turkey's offensive, and Trump said on Twitter, big sanctions on Turkey are coming. Do people really think we should go to war with NATO member Turkey? Never-ending wars will end. Now, while an impending clash between Turkey and Syria appears to be on the horizon, it remains to be seen how allies of each side will react moving forward. And John, it looks like this could be just the beginning of a new battle between Turkey and its NATO allies.
Rachel, thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So joining us now with more analysis about what's going on over there, a man who knows a lot about it, former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. So welcome to the show. There was just a background briefing involving the White House, DOD, other officials, in which they said, according to Vice President Pence and others, that President Trump spoke to President Erdogan today, says that the U.S. wants Turkey to stop the invasion and begin an immediate ceasefire, and that a delegation at some point is going to go over there. We'll see about that. But the first question I have, could this really spiral out of control and turn into a war between Turkey and Syria? What do you think?
On the one hand, it possibly could, but it's my late information that Turkey is allowing Syrian troops to move into those critical cities. They're doing it on their own. They Kobani and the others. They have not had an exchange of fire. But the only area that Syrians have agreed not to go into is where the Turks are actually coming in and battling with Kurds. And the question then is, will Erdogan ultimately, once he secures that so-called safe zone, allow the Syrians to take over the rest of the northern tier area, which extends all the way from Idlib almost up to Kobani and possibly into Mosul into Iraq.
Well, what's Turkey's play with that? I mean, strategically, what do you think Erdogan's aiming for with that?
Well, he talks about a safe zone to create a buffer with against the Kurds on the one hand. On the other hand, there is a map of Turkey that Erdogan's government has published in the past that shows, as part of a neo-Ottoman Empire, those northern parts has been incorporated back into Turkey. Is this going to be an annexation, or is this going to be implementation?
I mean, that's a big deal.
Oh yeah,
we're talking about annexation.
Yeah,
that Turkey wants the Ottoman Empire.
It's conceivable. I mean, that's the only way they can do it. But if he's allowing the Syrians to reoccupy, what this might infer is implementation of what was signed back in 1998, called the Adana Agreement, signed in Adana, Turkey. Russia, Turkey, Iran all agreed to securing the territorial integrity of Syria. Now, is this the implementation of that, while allowing Turkey then to get rid of what they regard as its enemies? It remains to be seen, because what we're seeing here is something very fluid right now. And if the Kurds have now set up an arrangement with the Syrian government, this may be the direction that they're going in allowing a reestablishment of Syrian authority over that entire region.
The Russians, as we know and as you know, and I think our viewers, have been aligned with Bashar al-Assad and Syria's government. You think the Russians would have any play in this? You think the Russians would get involved? Because after all, I mean, Russia has interest with Turkey as well. The S-400 missile system was just, deployed to Turkey.
I think Moscow has been purposely quiet somewhat to all of this. I think that they're seeing this leading in the direction of the implementation of that 1998 agreement. Again, reestablishing the territorial integrity of Syria. And I think right now, this minute, that seems to be the direction it's heading. I don't envision the Russians bombing Turks. This is not going to happen. I think the Russians are a little concerned that they're already militarily overextended, and they don't need a quagmire. But if Erdogan goes along with this agreement and allows the Syrian troops to move in, then things could smooth out for them.
Do you see a scenario where not only the U.S. delegation, not only would the United States be talking to Erdogan's administration in Ankara, but also possibly the Russians?
Oh, yeah, they are. I think,
well?
In fact, if Trump goes ahead and implements sanctions, I envision that Moscow will actually try to mitigate those sanctions somewhat on its end, and because this is really going to create a further fissure between Turkey, United States, and potentially NATO itself, and in terms of the viability of NATO and drawing Turkey closer eastward. And this is all part of a larger plan, if you will, that could be implemented toward this alternative world order, moving Turkey more eastward and away from the West.
President Trump has taken a lot of heat on this issue when he announced that troops would be pulling out and no longer would be working with the Kurds in northern and northeastern Syria. They've called it a betrayal. Do you think it is? Would you define that as a betrayal, or do you think Trump has a point in saying, President Trump saying, that he doesn't want to be caught, U.S. troops to be caught in the middle of a conflict potentially between Syria?
Yeah, it's all Turkey in the optics. He's been saying since campaign time he did not want to get in more foreign wars. He campaigned on getting us out of foreign wars. It's just that we're having now to deal with the harsh reality of trying to implement that. His approach is more eastward, more toward Asia. And I think that what we're seeing here is him and toward Iran. And I think that this is where he's going to move U.S. troops to an area where they might be available to deal with an ISIS resurgence, which I think this could occur, particularly in Iraq.
And that's been part of the big concern.
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely.
There's been reports that several hundred ISIS supporters or families of ISIS.
Yeah, but there are 30,000 of them. I mean, where are they all going to go? And nobody's taking them. Are they going to? And the Syrian, unless somehow the Syrians repatriate them somehow, but I don't see that happening. Or the foreign nationals are allowed to go back to their countries. I don't see that happening either. So this is really creating a major dilemma, and I think what they may do is flee ultimately to Anbar province in Iraq.
And final question.
Yeah.
We got about a minute left, maybe less than that at this point. But why should we as Americans care about this? I asked you this earlier.
Yeah,
you said
you
it was
did.
a tough question.
Yeah, this was before the show. Well, I think the loss of life, humanitarian crisis that could develop, but also there are strategic considerations. On the one hand, we wanted Assad overthrown at one time. Now this is basically giving it back to him and basically saying and recognizing that he is the de facto leader of Syria, will remain as such. It is creating consternation with Turkey, but is it really a problem for the United States? And I don't think so. But it does show that Turkey is moving more toward the east. Iraq is going to be the problem. And the potential for civil war is greater right there right now. U.S. has increasing troops right there, and I think that's where the focus is going to be in the near future, is Iraq, once again.
Yeah, absolutely. And this story is far from over at this point. There's going to be a lot more on it. Yeah. Just beginning. Absolutely. Michael Maloof, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. Love the tie, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Jerry Garcia tie.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Speaking of Russia, Russian President Vladimir Putin was welcomed in Saudi Arabia today by King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Talks range from economic cooperation, discussions on OPEC oil policy, and regional hotspots, including Syria, of course, the situation with the Kurds, and Iran. RT's Ilya Petrenko takes us through what happened earlier today in the lead-up to the meeting.
Saudi Arabia and Russia is a remarkable example of how two countries could be great partners or friends and foes at the same time. Everything that Riyadh gets itself involved in the Middle East, be it about Iran, Yemen, or Syria, gets full support from Washington. And you do realize that in all these cases, Russia is on the different side of the barricade. But when the Russian leader and the Saudi crown prince get along so well in person, by the way, they are the authors of probably the most famous high-profile high five in the world, the chances that the dialogue could work will always be very high.
I have very good relations with both the King and the Crown Prince. We have been making good headway practically in all fields.
Surely, we do have to bear in mind that the two countries are the world's largest oil producers. Are they competitors? No. In this case, most likely OPEC plus partners too. So all kinds of oil and gas and issues related to the energy sector are on the agenda, especially after the drone attack from last month on one of Saudi Arabia's most important oil refineries, which cut the country's output by almost a half and almost put the region on the brink of a real crisis. Yemen's Houthi rebels said, "We did it." Washington and allies almost immediately blamed it all on Tehran. It was feared that a U.S.-led strike on Iran could have been imminent. The incident even led to Vladimir Putin suggesting that Saudi Arabia, whose army is almost totally dependent on arms imports from the U.S., should buy Russian-made air defense missile systems. It's another chance for Mr. Putin to sell those, but even without them, $2 billion worth of contracts are expected to be signed between Moscow and Riyadh.